No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken episode number 329. Breaking right now, Islamist terror hits the UK once again, but our gutless leaders in MSM still want to talk about an invisible far-right threat. But Manchester is looking back in anger this time, with the Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy booed, heckled and baracked at a vigil in the past hour.
Pleasure in introducing our Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, and before I do, please, we know how we all feel, Go to Palestine! Shame on you!
Thank you.
They call for our death in the park! Walk past the university Sunday!
You do not want to live here anymore!
Islamism remains the elephant in the room, as the terrorist scumbag responsible for yesterday's atrocity, Jihad Al-Shamie, widely described as a British citizen. Stop bloody lying. Jihad, yep, that's his actual name, was an extremist from Syria, born and bred, who was given a passport in 2006 by our pathetic former Labour government. We gave him every opportunity the West could possibly provide, and yet he still decided to kill British innocents. And all of a sudden, slippery Starmer and Shabana Mahmood, who were so keen to talk about political ideology when it came to the so-called far right after Unite the Kingdom, now completely silent about Islam. It's a tale of two very different brands of leader.
I would have wanted those individuals to just take a step back. The issues that are driving those protests have been going on now for some time.
I promise you that over the coming days, you will see the other Britain, the Britain of compassion, of decency, of love.
But here's the truth of it. They weren't demonstrating. They were actually celebrating. I can't even imagine we've ever seen such vile scenes on our streets, certainly not in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's right. The UK has been swept by violent celebrations and riots after the terror attack, exposing the woke hard left as truly evil once again. The MSM has been particularly vile and corrupt, with James O'Brien, Paul Brand, Sly News and the fake news agents caring more about empowering the so-called far right than covering the actual threat of Islam to the UK.
Who will try to use this and are already using it to divide.
In the area have lived side by side for years, and they're understood to be very tolerant of one another, and he just could not believe that something like this would happen.
Are you concerned that actually, we're at a fractious time at the moment? We've seen febrile scenes for months across our country. Is this going to feed some of that?
It then crosses the threshold into terrorism.
So that can't be established in the moment, however compelling the visual evidence may be.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you look at what's happening here and you...
So in my digest next, why the Yom Kippur Manchester terror attack must be a wake-up call about Islamism after we ignored Ariana Grande, 7-7, London Bridge, Lee Rigby and Westminster. Then analysis from Connor Tomlinson of Tomlinson Talks on YouTube. Also coming up on the show today, outrage as a Reform UK rep crumbles live on air and is slammed by the MSM simply for using the phrase born and bred in another example of the UK gone mad. And woke advertising in Britain finally exposes over half of ads feature black people, even though they make up just 4% of the total population. Then in the uncancelled after show on Substack, Prince William opens up as we've never seen him before in an extraordinary interview for Apple with Eugene Levy, the star of Schitt's Creek, as he unveils his bold plan to reform the monarchy and opens up about Catherine's cancer battle, the challenges of parenting, and how the divorce of Charles and Diana impacted both him and Harry as adults. We'll analyse it all by teaming up with the Royal News Network over on Substack. You can sign up to watch at www.outspoken.live. Because it is a Friday too, we will also be revealing the worst Britain in the world this week. I think we've had something like 60,000 votes already. Get yours in now. Here are your nominees based on our union jackasses from across the week. Slippery Starmer from Monday, Shabana Mahmood from Tuesday, David Lammy from Wednesday, and Rachel Reeves from Thursday. We'll also bring you any breaking news, including, by the way, this shock new claim about the father of jihad. That in just one moment. Let's go. It takes a special type of evil to get out on the streets and celebrate a deadly terror attack on Jews at a synagogue on Yom Kippur, a great day of worship. But just like the Islamists on the streets of New York and in the Middle East on 9/11, the Islamists and hard leftists in the UK united overnight to do just that. And I want to be very clear. These were violent celebrations and riots, not protests. If these mongrels had an ounce of decency, they would have cancelled their demonstrations given the devastating events of yesterday. But they don't, so they did not. And of course, there was the most egregious two-tier response from our Muslim Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood and gutless Prime Minister Slippery Starmer, who both sought to demonise peaceful protests at Unite the Kingdom while protecting the pro-Hamas deplorables. However, the most insane elephant in the room is over the actual terrorist. Jihad Al-Shamie was an Islamist from Syria. Of course, the MSM, leaning into the fact he was a British citizen, but that's only because our pathetic former Labour government gave him a passport in 2006. This bloke was Syrian, born and bred. I mean, fuck me, his name is Jihad. Jihad! Your head explodes. We gave him every opportunity the West could possibly provide, and yet he still decided to try and kill innocents. And he succeeded when it came to 53-year-old Adrian Dolby and 66-year-old Malvern Kravitz, both from Crumpsall, Manchester, even if it does appear now that one was tragically taken out by a stray police bullet. It's Jihad who ultimately created the situation. Now, Jihad's trauma surgeon father, Faraj, has today issued a statement on Facebook. Let me read it to you. He's posted, "The news from Manchester regarding the terror attack targeting a Jewish synagogue has been a profound shock to us. The Al-Shamie family in the UK and abroad strongly condemns this heinous act, which targeted peaceful, innocent civilians. We fully distance ourselves from this attack and express our deep shock and sorrow over what has happened. Our hearts and thoughts are with the victims and their families, and we pray for their strength and comfort." Now, that statement isn't good enough for me, I'm afraid. Because, Faraj, we need to understand how your son was given everything by Britain and then still set out to destroy us. And we need to understand about you too, Faraj. What type of father were you? What type of person were you? Given the Daily Telegraph is reporting in the past few hours that the Manchester attacker's father praised October the 7th Hamas terrorists. Days after the terror group attacked Israel, Faraj Al-Shamie posted, "Men like these prove they are Allah's men on earth." So, excuse me if your little Facebook statement doesn't measure up. We need answers, and we're going to get answers, because this must be a wake-up call about Islamism. But then again, we ignored Ariana Grande, we ignored 7/7, we ignored London Bridge, we ignored Lee Rigby, we ignored Westminster. And have you noticed all of a sudden Mahmood and Starmer, who were so keen to talk about ideology when it came to the so-called far right at Unite the Kingdom, are now completely silent about Islam? We know why. We see you. But something changed today. In the past hour, Manchester is indeed looking back in anger, with the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, booed, heckled and barracked at a vigil. Watch.
Therefore, I have great pleasure in introducing our Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, and before I do, please, we know how we all feel. We know how we all feel.
Go to Palestine! Shame on you! Shame on you! Go to Palestine! Leave us alone!
They've allowed it to work on the country. Children's school was closed today. You have allowed this to happen.
You have blood on your hands!
You're all guilty of all you have allowed Jewish in Manchester on the street. You have allowed it. You are all guilty. You do not want this speaking here today. You do not speak. Do not speak. You do not want this speaking. Shame on you. Shame on you.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
Shame on you.
Enough!
Empty words.
Okay, all right, we've heard enough. We've heard enough. We've heard enough. We know how you feel. I know how I feel.
Absolutely extraordinary. That moment, I think, is historically significant. That moment is like when Starmer visited the scene of the Southport massacre a year ago. Do you remember that? And walked off after being heckled by locals. And then he started his tirade against the far right. Now, given the language and the politics of Lammy, quite rightly, that furious crowd wasn't buying his bullshit.
Weekend, I asked them to reflect with all human dignity, grace and understanding, and to stop and to stand back. Thank you.
They call for our death in the park! Walk past the university someday! You do not want to live here anymore! Thank you from a proud...
Okay, our next speaker is the...
And every Labour minister should be feeling that type of anger. And so what's going to happen? They're going to retreat. They're going to retreat. They don't want to face any of us. But the true evil of the woke left has to be exposed. I mean, this is part of my life's work, and there was no better example than yesterday after the terror attack. One protester told the Daily Telegraph, I don't give a fuck about the Jewish community right now. I thought about it, and I'm sorry about what happened, but the whole story and why we're here is because of what happened with Greta Thunberg. Proof that this tidal wave of Jew hatred is continuing. The scenes right up and down our disunited kingdom were sickening. As Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform UK, wrote after spotting the start of the London pro-terror celebrations, decent folk mourn the horrific terrorist murder of Jews in Manchester, yet this bunch see fit to hoot and toot in London. Perhaps they are pro-Hamas. Watch.
Well, here we are. It's Yom Kippur. There's been a terrorist outrage in Manchester where Jews have been killed. We've got a ceasefire deal that everybody's agreed for Gaza and to release the hostages. Everybody, of course, except Hamas. And here's this lot, after a terrorist incident, with dead Jews in the morgue, and this lot are celebrating, hooting and tooting. Frankly, utterly disgusting.
As Neo Berg put it, imagine being this demonic. And on the violence that then broke out between the pro-Hamas demonstrators and the police, Liz Truss said horrible scenes in London the day of the heinous terrorist attack on a synagogue in Manchester. The government and the authorities continue to appease Islamism rather than take it on. Look at what went down. As Adam Brooks said, police are under attack by pro-Palestine protesters. Will we get a speech by Starmer and his cabinet condemning this, or is this just for protesters on the far right of politics? Causing Tommy Robinson to add, "Where's the riot gear and batons?" Jack Hadders, who was on the scene, reported at the Trafalgar Square end of Whitehall, pro-Palestine protesters started pushing the police lines and vans. Shortly after, chants from the crowd of "Death, death to the IDF" rang out. Watch. Devastated London Jew Nicole Lampert wrote, "It seems that a few hours after the synagogue killings, some pro-Palestinians thought it would be a fabulous idea to march calling for the eradication of the Jewish state in London. There were thousands of them. The only glimmer of light, I feel, is how a few commented on the live feed to say it was disgusting. If you want to see how anti-Semitism was allowed to fester, you only have to see what happened this evening, how they celebrate dead Jews." Indeed, Lisa Rosen said there was even a call for the beheading of Jews. Watch. And trust me, this was happening all over the country, not just in London. As Heidi Backram put it, at 5:30, Brighton pro-Pals plan to take over the train station. Last time they did it, this woman said all Zionists should die. Jews were murdered in Manchester today. Police here will do nothing to stop people like this spewing their violent hate.
So what should happen to the Zionists? All of them. All Zionists should die.
Habibi reported the Palestine Solidarity Campaign thinks today is a good day for death chants in Leeds. They also have an intifada banner with a hammer and sickle. Terror and tyranny, the hate march sweet spot. Watch. In Scotland, Glasgow Central Station and Edinburgh both mobbed by pro-Hamas supporters celebrating today's events and chanting "Globalise the Intifada." And look at what happened when one brave soul suggested the innocent hostages should be freed. So now I've presented unequivocal evidence. I think we can all agree, right? These marches were celebrations of a terror attack and the slaughter of innocents on the streets of the UK. As Dan Hodges put it, can we just be crystal clear? This was circulated 5 hours ago. The organisers knew what had happened in Manchester today. They knew what the feeling would be amongst the Jewish community. They knew precisely what reaction it would have on Jews present in London tonight, and they urged their supporters out onto the streets anyway. This afternoon, the PM said he would do everything to keep Jews safe. And this evening, thousands of people are literally roaming the streets chanting about killing Jews and eradicating the Jewish state. It is a day of utter shame for our country. And remember, more of these hate marches are planned tomorrow and over the weekend in support of the terrorist group Palestine Action, even though police have asked for them to be cancelled in order to step up protection of synagogues. As Alex Phillips said, after the Unite the Kingdom rally, Starmer made a lot of noise about the far right and intolerance, unless they condemn every single sick, cynical Palestine protest deliberately held today, anything said about solidarity with British Jews is proven flagrant lies. Well, this is all we got. This is all we got from the disgraceful Shabana Mahmood.
Have been so busy, and another man told me, which I've heard from a few people around here actually, that this area is a very tolerant area. It's a multicultural area. It's a place where Jewish people and Muslim community, there are large communities of both of those faiths in the area, have lived side by side for years, and they're understood to be very tolerant of one another. And he just could not believe that something like this would happen, and let alone here in a community where there are multiple different faiths living here in peace and tolerance. But yes, just confirming that news that we've had from Greater Manchester Police, that two members of the public are confirmed now to have died from this attack at the synagogue here.
That obviously wasn't Shabana Mahmood, but what she said was that she was a bit disappointed. These protests were just a bit un-British. And it was a stark contrast to her hysterical reaction after Unite the Kingdom. Indeed, there were well over double the arrests last night, as Tommy Robinson pointed out. 40 arrests tonight in London for the pro-Hamas mob. We had millions on the streets and only 26 arrests. Let's see if we hear similar condemnation for the Palestinian mob as we heard for our UTK celebration. Nigel Farage appears to be the only party leader prepared to get even partway towards the truth, as he reacted in fury today.
Within just a few hours of this horrific incident, we saw in London, Glasgow and elsewhere, pro-Palestinian flags on the streets, people out, previously unplanned, demonstrating. But here's the truth of it. They weren't demonstrating. They were actually celebrating. I can't even imagine we've ever seen such vile scenes on our streets, certainly not in my lifetime. In response to this, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says she's disappointed. Disappointed. That's the most the Home Secretary can say. Well, I hope all of you watching this video are outraged. Outraged and frankly frightened. This is broken Britain. This is evidence of societal breakdown. It is deeply worrying and very frightening. Will this Prime Minister do anything about it? No, in fact, he's emboldened these people by his recognition of Palestine 2 weeks ago. And never forget, this is the Prime Minister that took the knee just a few short years ago to an extremist group. Now, there is a big march planned in London this Saturday. And I think the only way we can describe it is a hate march. Whether the Home Secretary and the police decide they've got the powers to stop it, I don't know. What is for certain is we're a country that allows peaceful protest, but we're not a country that allows the celebration of murder or slogans in our street that are deeply insightful. I must admit, saying this now to you today, I feel more worried about the state of broken Britain than I ever have before.
I was very disappointed to see those protests go ahead last night. I think that behaviour is fundamentally un-British. I think it's dishonourable. I would have wanted those individuals to just take a step back. The issues that are driving those protests have been going on now for some time. They don't look like they're going to come to an end any day soon. They could have stepped back and just given a community that has suffered deep loss just a day or two to process what has happened and to carry on with the grieving process. I think some humanity could have been shown. I am disappointed that humanity and solidarity wasn't shown to our Jewish community.
Of course, Slippery Starmer's decision to recognise a Palestinian state and King Charles's seeming sympathies towards Islam over Christianity and the Jewish religion are now both political hot potatoes. Days before the Manchester attack, the president of Israel, it has emerged, warned the king over rising anti-Semitism, speaking about Commonwealth nations being overrun with anti-Jewish hatred. While Israel's controversial PM has blamed his British counterpart for the barbaric attack, with Netanyahu accusing Starmer of failing to curb a toxic wave of anti-Semitism and warning weakness in the face of terrorism only brings more terrorism. Only strength and unity can defeat it. It's worth listening to this rabbi.
I would urge Keir Starmer to reconsider. I would say shame on you. You were Director of Public Prosecutions. You prosecuted terrorists. You know what terrorists are capable of doing in this country, and even more so in Israel. We saw 1,200 people being massacred on the 7th of October. They promised to do it again and again, and you're recognizing a state of exactly these people. So Keir, I challenge you. This is the time to change your mind, to look like a leader, not like a follower, to stop being an appeaser like Neville Chamberlain. Do what's right for the British people, not for the mob.
Yet the usual suspects will victim blame, even after a terror attack. Bushra Sheikh wrote, "I don't give a fuck. The Manchester attack is on Netanyahu. He has Jewish blood on his hands. Watch."
I am absolutely livid right now. I'm livid right now, and I'm going to make this video because I need to do it. I have to get this off my chest because it's been months and months and months and months and months, and for some reason we can't call things out as they are. I blame this on Benjamin Netanyahu. Sorry, because he keeps telling the world that those atrocities that are taking place in Gaza is for the security and the safety of Jewish people.
That prompted a massive response. Tommy Robinson raged, "This vile bitch doubles down on blaming a Jew in the Middle East for a jihadi attack on Jews in England. Despicable." Maya Tusi hit back, writing, "This evil creature says these things and lives in the UK. This is what the British people have to deal with every single day." And Liam Tufts said, "What a despicable cockroach you are. ISIS requested this type of attack less than a month ago. You're vile." There was a similar approach from race baiter Dr. Scholler, who argued, horrified, not shocked about Manchester Synagogue, Israel's war crimes endangers all Jews. Not shocked Zionists are weaponizing it against Free Palestine protests and inciting hatred against Muslims, which is already astronomical. Tommy responded this time, "This slag blames Israel. The encouragement of violence and attacks against Israel Jews is mainstream. It's supported by our government. Fuck Hamas, fuck Palestine, fuck Labour." Prompting the always vile Dr. Scholler to argue, "Slag, Tommy boy, you must be speaking of the woman who birthed you, the woman who birthed your children, the woman who your seed spawns. Keep your misogynist filth to yourself and the women in your life." But I understand why Tommy Robinson is angry today, because he believes history has proven him right.
Hold on a minute. You lot are the reason that ideology has been able to grow so powerful in our country. You're the fucking reason. You shut down debate. You politicians, you journalists, you commentators, every one of you. You made it impossible. Impossible to have a discussion about that idea, that mindset, that terrorist group, any of it. You made it impossible. And now you have the police. You literally have Muslims walking down the street calling for the beheading of Jews. And the police, you nicked me. You nicked me 2 months ago. You questioned me, and under caution, you arrested me for a fuck Hamas tweet. Yet you're letting the Muslims walk down the street calling for the beheading of Jews in our country. And then you're all surprised. We're going to step up patrols around synagogues. We're going to step up patrols. How about you don't step up patrols? How about you dealt with this for the last decade? How about every time someone calls for jihad on our streets, you nick them? How about when they fly a jihadi flag or a terrorist symbol, you arrest them? How about the hate preachers in the mosque who have been calling for the murder of Jews for the last year, quite openly, in mosques across our country?
He then took aim at the MSM.
And then the same people that have facilitated it, the Dan Hodges of this world, the journalists of this world, who have shut down Brendan Cox, you womaniser. Keep your hands to yourself, Brendan. But people like Brendan Cox, who absolutely, diversity is our strength. You're a fascist, you're an extremist, you're a racist. Diversity is our power. We love standing having your photo taken with Islamists and Muslims, the same Muslims that are now calling for the total destruction of every Jew in the world. Where are your mates now? Border deputies, where are your friends that you stood with against us? For the last 15 years, you stood with the enemy against us. And we called out that enemy. And we've been proven right about that enemy time and time again. You have betrayed your own community. Tried to turn everyone against us. We were the only sane voice the whole way through all of this, was us. And we still stand there now, against all your smears, against all your attacks, against all your prosecutions. Whilst at the same time, while they try and imprison us and beat us, you still use your platforms to try and tread on us, to try and beat us, whilst amplifying so-called moderates who are walking along from the river to the sea. You clowns. Know your enemy. Identify your enemy. Tell the truth about your enemy. Don't make excuses for them. Don't shut down debate exposing them.
But we don't even know yet the full truth about Jihad Al-Shamie. Because there's question marks over his father, there's question marks over how he was radicalised, and there's question marks about what the authorities knew about him. Yesterday, they said, oh, we knew nothing about him. You know, this was a model citizen. Well, the Daily Telegraph, breaking right now, reporting that Jihad Al-Shamie was actually on bail for rape. Can you believe that? The Manchester synagogue terrorist was on police bail for an alleged rape when he carried out the attack, the Daily Telegraph can disclose. Jihad Al-Shamie, 35, was under investigation over an alleged sexual attack, which is understood to have taken place earlier this year. So why the hell were we not told that yesterday? Why the hell is this information dripping out through the media? So I repeat, we now know beyond any doubt that hard left hatred is at the point where violence and even the cold-blooded murder of innocent Brits will be celebrated, which means something must be done. But do we even have a leader who is in charge? The British Patriot wrote on X, the far right doesn't drive into crowds, the far right doesn't knife innocent people, the far right doesn't blow up pop concerts, the far right doesn't gang rape white girls, the far right aren't 90% of MI5's terror watch list, the imaginary far right doesn't exist. But Elon Musk added chillingly, Starmer is an actor with an empty head. Others feed him the words to say. And as Rupert Lowe argued, we don't need more thoughts and prayers from government. Action is now needed. What I'm more convinced about than ever is that I will explode the next time a senior politician like Sadiq Khan makes this argument.
Our diversity isn't a weakness, but our greatest strength.
Diversity is our greatest strength. It makes us stronger, not weaker. It makes us richer, not poorer. And it also makes us more fun.
One thing to say in relation to Londoners who are Muslim is, look, one of our strengths is our diversity. You look at the success of most successful cities and countries. That's by embracing difference. That's by being diverse, recognising it's a strength, not a weakness.
Enough, enough, enough. Now, Connor Tomlinson. Connor, so they've been lying to us again. They've been lying to us again. Yesterday, oh no, we don't know anything about Jihad Al-Shamie. You know, he wasn't wanted by law enforcement. But really, they did know exactly who he was. If this Daily Telegraph report is accurate, he was on police bail for rape.
The fact that we even have bail for rape in this country means that the politicians, the police, the civil service, the justice system, which is ironically named at this point, is happy to endanger the British public in order so that it doesn't get called racist. And I would rather be called racist than enable rape and now murder and terrorism. And there are multiple sickening things to respond to from your monologue, Dan, that have been said by our politicians and media class. The first, of course, being Sadiq Khan and Sky News, before the bodies are even cold, saying diversity is our strength. When they say our, they don't mean us, Dan. And they don't mean even the friendly minorities that have ingratiated themselves into our families, or Jews who aren't responsible for a disproportionate number of terror attacks. They mean their co-belligerents, their co-ethnics, their leftist agitators and revolutionaries, who are all being used as useful idiots by, and you said Islamists, I would just say Muslims, because the problem is, Dan, is that if you try and split hairs between Islamists and the moderate Muslims who just fail to read their own texts quite closely, you run into the difficult situation of asking, was Muhammad himself an Islamist? And the absurdity of that question should answer itself. And so, while they refuse to say Mr. Jihad is a terrorist, and they play dumb about the motivation that he might have, Shabana Mahmood herself saying, oh, well, I've never met anyone called Jihad, to which I would ask, well, if Jihad is just internal spiritual struggle, why is that a strange word to call your child, Shabana? We must instead turn to the Quran and the Hadiths to find his inspiration. I mean, first of all, jihad is overwhelmingly used in conjunction with fighting, or fighters, that is mujahideen in the Quran, and that's why one of the caliphs himself compiled an entire book of hadiths dedicated to jihad, and he said this is the word that his fighting force when battling the Romans and killing them, this is the word that comes to define his holy mission as imparted to him by Allah. But throughout the Quran, Hadith, it's replete with verses that just call for violence. For example, saying that Allah will cast horror into the hearts of the disbelievers, so strike at their necks and their fingertips, so cut off their hands and cut their throats, and telling Muslims, when you meet the disbelievers in battle, strike their necks until you have thoroughly subdued them, then bind them firmly, and multiple sword verses compelling Muslims to kill the mushrikun, who at the time were a tribe that supposedly broke their oath to Muhammad, or just general polytheists or Christians and Jews who they should not befriend, to decapitate them, kill them where you meet them, subject them to the sword and make them either pay the jizya, submit to Islam, become second-class citizens, or die. And then, specifically with Jews, Muhammad always had a problem with Jews, because when he migrated from Mecca to Medina, the very successful Jewish tribes in the area didn't accept him as the prophet that he claimed, so he always harbored resentment against them and waged war with them at the Battle of Khandaq and when he besieged Khaybar. The particular issue they have with Jews, by the way, isn't just that they rejected Muhammad, but when he besieged Khaybar, he took his first cousin as his seventh wife, which is why cousin marriage is so replete in the Muslim world, after killing her original husband and her father, and she, considering she was living as a sex slave, decided to poison a leg of lamb and feed it to Muhammad, killing one of his followers and inflicting a fatal wound upon him. So she was executed, and today Muslims blame Jews for killing Muhammad, and that's why in the Hadiths it says, rocks and trees on Judgment Day will come alive with the Spirit of Allah and say where the Jews are hiding, so the Muslims will kill them. And Judgment Day will not happen until they declare war upon the Jews. That's what global intifada means. That's why when all the Jews are wiped out, the Christians will be next. That's why they hate our country. That's why they march in celebration after October the 7th and after yesterday's terror attack. And that is why, Dan, we must be declarative and say the only way this gets solved is if Islam is unwelcome in Britain. And that means all of its practitioners.
Can we also talk, Connor, about the father here? Because you and I have spoken a lot about Axel Rudagabana and his family, and there are parallels here, right? Because this is someone who entered our country in the case of Jihad from Syria as a youngster because of his dad. And the dad, Jihad Al-Shamie, comes out with this Facebook statement today. And, you know, it's very much distancing ourselves from the attack, and our hearts and thoughts are with the victims and their families. But no explanation as to how this all went down with his son. And then you start to look at Jihad Al-Shamie's posts, which the Daily Telegraph has tracked down after October the 7th, for example. And I mean, this was literally what he did post on October the 7th. You know, God bless you, and may he bless you with true men from the lineage of true men. That's speaking about the terrorists who conducted those attacks. And there's another post where he says, this is on October the 11th, 2023, our brothers in Gaza, a second surprise the size of what you did on the 7th will follow. Followed by the first resounding fall of a great traitor in our region. So it seems very clear to me that this father is also a hater of Israel, at the very least.
Yes, and not just a hater of Israel, but a hater of our country. So I don't care whether or not he posted something anti-Israel. I don't care whether or not this was caused by negligent parenting or just his accurate transmission of the values of the Quran and the Hadiths down to his son Jihad. I don't care what the motivation was. This man should not be in my country. He should be stripped of his citizenship and swiftly deported. He and his son are unwelcome in this country. They would not just not reproduce my civilization, but they have violent beliefs and have declared their support and even then committed terror attacks against peaceful law-abiding citizens. They shouldn't be afforded all the benefits of being in this country. No doubt we are somewhat subsidizing him and his son's stay. But this isn't just a copy of Axel Rudakabana's story, Dan. This is also a copy of the Abedi family. The Abedi family came over from Libya after being themselves jihadists that fell out with Colonel Gaddafi. They were put up in Manchester at the expense of the taxpayer, paid housing and out-of-work benefits, and then their sons used those benefits, paid for by the taxpayer, to build a nail bomb, walk into an Ariana Grande concert, detonate it, and kill many children. And what did they do? They didn't comply with the investigation, and they fled back to Libya, and then they continued to take benefits while they were out of the country. We should not be taking any refugees or fake asylum seekers from the Muslim world. We should be closing our borders to the Muslim world. We should be encouraging Muslims to leave the country. We should not be having any more rapes, terror attacks, or corpses. The evidence is in. They are not compatible with this country, and this should be the last one. They should leave.
Of course, the mainstream media has typically disgraced itself in the wake of the terror attack on a synagogue on Yom Kippur, because the mainstream media in the United Kingdom, just like the political establishment, are complicit in covering up the barbaric crimes of Islam and instead creating a bogeyman in an invisible far right. And even when there has literally been an Islamist terror attack on a mosque, killing innocents, still they reach the fact that the real problem is people like me, people like Connor Tomlinson. We're the issue. So the news agents, or the fake news agents as I put them, that terrible show hosted by the hard leftists Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, and Lewis Goodall, actually posted, although I am told they have now deleted, there are many people in journalism who will try to use this and are already using it to divide. Why the Yom Kippur synagogue attack in Manchester will be exploited by the right wing to sow division in the UK. I mean, I was utterly furious about this. I said, are you fucking kidding me? It's not right-wing journalists sowing division, it's the Islamists like Jihad literally trying to kill us. The fake news agents are scum. Konstantin Kisin weighed him, saying scum is the right word, adding a man called Jihad has gone on murder spree on a synagogue, and two respected, neutral and balanced recent BBC stalwarts would like you to believe the problem is right-wing journalists. You really, really, really don't hate the media enough. Winston Marshall added, I have such deep contempt for everyone involved with this sham podcast, a murderous Islamist attack, and they're concerned about journalists reporting on it. They will vilify all of us who are actually prepared to talk about it honestly whilst cravingly avoiding the truth. Now, that post on X was actually sparked from a conversation with one of the worst men in Britain, a bloke called David Yelland, the former editor of the Sun newspaper. Watch.
But I also know, very sadly, there are many people in our profession, and sadly in journalism, on the right, I have to say, and probably on the left as well, who will try to use this and are already using it to divide.
When you say already using it, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, I switched on GB News, actually as soon as I heard about this, because that's sort of my journalist instinct, and they were talking about asylum seekers. They were talking about how the Prime Minister may, in their view, or in the view of whoever was talking, had lost control over the number of Muslims in this country and so on. Now, that makes all kinds of assumptions about what the attack is and who the perpetrator is. But it is also, in my view, what terrorists want.
And there are Mateless and Sopel just nodding along, when we all know that they have been absolutely desperate since the Unite the Kingdom rally to try and create some type of far-right bogeyman. I mean, James O'Brien keeps referring to the Farage riots, right? Even though there's absolutely no way Nigel had anything to do with what went on in Southport last year. Yesterday, he was literally jumping through hoops in order not to refer to Jihad Al-Shamie as a terrorist, let alone an Islamist terrorist. Watch.
Terrorist inevitably appears in coverage, and it certainly appears to fit all of the facts as we have them. Andy, what are the rules, as it were, for applying that term definitively?
Well, it comes down to the motive. And if the motive is politically driven, and if your intent is to cause violence for that purpose, then it then crosses the threshold into terrorism.
So that can't be established in the moment, however compelling the visual evidence may be.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you look at what's happening here and you look at what's unfolding, it pretty much ticks every single box that you would expect of a terror attack.
Then there was the always wrong Paul Brand on Woke ITV, who, of course, totally obsessed with the far right, but doesn't give a damn about an Islamist terror attack on Jews. So he's constantly talking on Woke ITV about the far right, but he could not even use the word Islamist last night. Instead, he was concerned about feeding tension on the streets because of the profile of the attacker. Just say it. Just say it. He was an Islamist extremist. Watch.
Absolutely. And for all the sort of messages of solidarity that we're hearing tonight, the coming together of communities, given the profile of the attacker, are you concerned that actually, we're at a fractious time at the moment? We've seen febrile scenes for months across our country. Is this going to feed some of that tension?
Of course I'm concerned. How could you not be after what's happened today and after the conversations I've had with my family and my friends who live around here. But I also think it's really important to say what happened today, that man that you've just shown a photo of, he was a terrorist. It was a terrorist act. And what that means is that he chose on this special day, on Yom Kippur, one of the most special days in the Jewish calendar, to come down the road to that synagogue and to murder Jewish people on the streets of Manchester, on the streets of Britain, for no other reason than they're Jewish. That's terrorism. Terrorism has no place in this country. And however febrile and difficult things are in politics or in our communities at the moment, terrorism is a whole different thing that we will never allow.
And as Connor Tomlinson of Tomlinson Talks pointed out, Sly News used the live announcement that 2 people had died during today's Muslim terror attack on Yom Kippur to remind viewers that Manchester is a very tolerant, multicultural area and a place where Jewish people and Muslim communities have lived side by side for years. As he said, the bodies weren't even cold before they started repeating the diversity is our strength propaganda. Watch.
Have been so busy, and another man told me, which I've heard from a few people around here actually, that this area is a very tolerant area. It's a multicultural area. It's a place where Jewish people and Muslim community, there are large communities of both of those faiths in the area, have lived side by side for years, and they're understood to be very tolerant of one another. And he just could not believe that something like this would happen, and let alone here in a community where there are multiple different faiths living here in peace and tolerance. But yes, just confirming that news that we've had from Greater Manchester Police, that 2 members of the public are confirmed now to have died from this attack at the synagogue here.
And there was so much of this across the Sly News losers and the British Bashing Corporation. Watch this.
This is the holiest day, as you say, in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, and a lot of people would have been worshipping at that mosque at the time. I haven't been able to speak to anyone directly, but looking around, there's a lot of extremely concerned people around here. Obviously, worshippers from the mosque. There are crowds on the street just outside this cause.
People on the hard right, the far right, are a bit divided on their attitude to the Jewish community these days in the UK. But certainly the Jewish community has felt that they were at risk from multiple directions, some from the sort of extremist Islamist direction, but also some from the kind of neo-Nazi elements on the far right. So it is both that are of concern. And as you said, at this stage, we don't really know.
And praying that as a community we respond in the way that we typically do in Greater Manchester, and respond well, and respond by showing our love and our unity.
Conor Tomlinson, I mean, the coverage from the mainstream media has been insane, infuriating.
Yeah, it's totally sickening, and the Sky News piece in particular is gross for two reasons. The first is that the cognitive dissonance displayed by saying we're a very diverse and multicultural area where people live in harmony, but not to reassess your priors when someone who has been granted British citizenship apparently lived in this tolerant and diverse area all his life, where people coexist perfectly, and it's not like a Middle Eastern PvP server recreated in our biggest city, goes out and runs a car into and stabs Jews to death on Yom Kippur, doesn't cause you to reassess how tolerant and wonderfully strong your diverse and ethnoculturally heterogeneous city is. So completely insane from them. But additionally insane because, and people who have read Ed Hussein's book Among the Mosques will know this, Manchester is particularly bad for the sons and daughters of refugees or fake asylum seekers and young Muslims being very radical and taking over mosques. So even if we are to say again that moderate Muslims, not a term I believe in, are the ones running the mosques and aren't preaching violence, well, said Muslims are expressing concern to the likes of Ed in his book and saying the sons and daughters of refugees that have been relocated to Manchester from Syria, Palestine, and Iraq are promoting anti-Zionist politics and anti-Jewish rhetoric in their mosques, and are particularly hold ethnic grudges against the English because these mosques are Deobandi, which is a sect of Islam that was established in the 19th century in the British Raj, colonial administrated India, to resist the British. So there's an ethnic and colonial grudge against the British as well as hating Jews. And this has been exacerbated because the younger generation who are consuming Dawa content online, which is like ideologically subversive Islamic content online, are promoting violence against the British state and Jewish people and whites. And this is particularly prominent, again, among the Pakistani grooming gangs who blamed British girls themselves for being white kuffar, and the families of the grooming gangs excused the crimes because they said, by Allah, they dress so modestly, and shouted out during the trials, I love you, Dad. But also, if you look at the Henry Jackson Society polling from last year, only 1/4 of British Muslims living in Britain, believe Hamas did anything wrong on October the 7th. 52% want to criminalise depictions of their Prophet Muhammad, and a third want Sharia law and Islam to become the official religion of Britain. And that's mainly concentrated among second generation, British-born, university-educated Muslims, 18 to 30. So much like Mr. Jihad, who was given British citizenship and all the benefits of the asylum system, the Muslims that are born here, that have been through Britain's institutions, that are apparently as English as you and me, according to Shabana Mahmood, are the most radical, the most violent, the most Jew-hating, and the most hating of white Christians in Britain. And so this is an intergenerational problem that will not be solved by further assimilation programs or more security around synagogues. Why does the security needed in the first place? It's not the far right, it is Islam. And that is a problem that we cannot coexist with.
Conor, can you just try and explain why the elite class, the media class, are so terrified of having these conversations over Islam? I mean, the fact that on the day of an attack like that, Emily Maitlis and John Sopel, who were, of course, previously two of the BBC's main journalists for breaking news, would decide to get in some hard leftist nutter like David Yelland to talk about people like you, talk about people like me, make out that so-called right-wing journalists are the problem. Why did they do that? Like, where does the terror come from? Why are they so unable to talk about the problem that is actually right in front of them, which is their job, by the way, as journalists?
Yeah, there are three reasons, Dan. The first is, and this applies to the likes of Shabana Mahmood, she's running cover for her co-ethnics and her religion. She's trying to insulate Islam from any criticism. The second is for wet liberals.
Yeah, but she is Muslim, right? And she wants to be part of the Muslim takeover of the UK. She wants to be the first Muslim prime minister. So weirdly, with her, I understand, right? I actually understand what her motivations are. John Sapel and Emily Maitlis are not Muslim. So what's with them?
Yeah, so there's two reasons there. The second is wet liberals who believe in the blank slate, who believe that all violence and inequality, economic, education, even geographic, is completely arbitrary and can be remedied by a liberal state who realizes that literally everyone is exactly equal and that we are fungible and replaceable and swappable. And so if you just give enough social housing and classes on women's consent to all the men from Mogadishu, Lahore, and Damascus, they will become as British or as English as you and me, according to Shabana Mahmood. The third reason, though, Dan, and this is very taboo, but there are lots of Jews who agree with me here, is that there are a subset of liberal Jews, including John Sopel and Emily Maitlis themselves, who are ethnically Jewish, but who count themselves as the children of immigrants or the children of refugees. And so they put themselves in the same box as the likes of Mr. Jihad. And so they think that if they don't allow Mr. Jihad in, that their own parents and grandparents who fled the Holocaust and the pogroms of Soviet Russia would never have been allowed in. And so Britain must apply the blank slate, must apply culture-blind liberalism that I just described to its border policy. Otherwise, the Holocaust will happen again. The great irony of this, as Renaud Camus said in his lecture to the Parisian Jewish Forum, is that liberals, gay men like himself, feminists, and liberal Jews are soaring off the branch upon which they sit because they refuse to treat Muslim anti-Semitism as any different to Jews fleeing the Holocaust. And so we have to start distinguishing between peoples, between cultures, between countries, and yes, between religions that are compatible with Britain and not. And Islam certainly is not.
Okay, we are going mad in the United Kingdom. We are going completely and utterly mad. And we're going mad in the mainstream media, which is something that I've been pointing out for months. But for Reform UK as a party to be buying into their total bullshit is something that depresses me on a daily basis. So I've got to talk about this Reform Scottish councillor. She's called Claire Mackey Brown. And she has gone viral because of what was a clearly car crash interview with the crooked and corrupt broadcaster STV in Scotland, right? Which is the Scottish version of woke ITV. When she was asked a question about a case of a white male rapist in Falkirk. And during the course of this interview, she used the term born and bred and then crumbled on air. Literally crumbled on air as if she'd just been caught out, exposed as some type of far-right racist. Paul Embry, who is actually on the left, remember, posted on this. This is absolutely bizarre. A local councillor tells a TV interviewer that she was born and bred here, then checks herself as if she has said something terrible. And then the interviewer weighs in against her for saying it. Truly extraordinary. And Susan Hall added, what's wrong with saying I was born and bred here? We are losing it. If we think that's wrong, then we need to have a word with ourselves. But I promise you I'm not exaggerating. I want you to watch this full extraordinary gotcha moment, and shame on STV for believing this is a gotcha moment, but also, and I don't mean to be horrible to the woman, because clearly she's under a lot of pressure, but shame on Councillor Mackey Brown, and shame on Reform UK, actually, too, for creating a climate where they are so terrified of being falsely accused of racism. Watch.
No, it's nothing to do with the fact that I'm reform, I was an independent before and my views would be exactly the same. Everything I do is for the best of the communities that I serve, and I think, I've been overwhelmed with the contacts I've had from people within Falkirk. And, there is a true unrest, and it's scary. It's scary as a local resident, somebody who's born and bred here. I shouldn't have said that.
Well, do you see why this is people sometimes think that reform are very much against having people
that just
here?
came out. It just came out.
That's unfortunate for you, I guess. But ultimately, do you see why people who aren't from here, who have maybe made their home here, are annoyed when they hear an elected official say that people are born and bred here?
I've seen that as a local resident, to be honest, because I'm born from Slamana, and that's why I said it wasn't as a councillor. But yeah, I do understand. Yeah.
The whole thing just makes me want to scream in frustration. This was the take of fellow reformer Darren Grimes.
To be absolutely clear, my colleague here, Councillor Claire Mackey-Brown, has been lured into this interview under false pretences, right? She's asked about the rape, a suspected rape of a white perpetrator. The goal of the STV journalist here wasn't to discuss that local issue. It was actually to manufacture an offence and create a political hit job. The tactic, to me, is about as cynical as it is transparent. You ambush a councillor with a line of questioning designed to try and trip them up. You ignore the substance of the concerns and the concerns of the residents who have been protesting outside of various properties, and you hunt for a single perfectly normal phrase that can be twisted into a thought crime. It's textbook activist journalism, and it brings to the absolute state of modern Scotland right into that focal lens. This is a country that gave the world the Enlightenment, and it's collapsed into post-truth basket case mentality. It's terrified of its own shadow. This is the land of Adam Smith. This is the land of David Hume, and it's become a nation of frightened conformists, actually policed by a media class who think stating where you're from is a thought crime. A decent local councillor felt that she had to instantly retreat after saying something as completely unremarkable as being born and bred in Falkirk. It shows you the power of this media intimidation.
Connor Tomlinson of Thompson Talks on YouTube with me now. And look, Connor, I do fundamentally agree with what Darren Grimes is saying, but the reality is it is Reform UK that has created the type of climate where Councillor Claire Mackey-Brown sees her career flashing before her eyes because they have so bought in to the mainstream media narrative about being falsely accused of racism. What do you make of that bizarre interview?
Some people just aren't cut out of politics, Dan. That's the fundamental truth of it. I'm sure she seems like a very nice woman, but if she was an independent and then she's now become Reform, I'm not sure whether she was re-elected as Reform councillor or simply defected, it seems to me that she is just moving in the direction of incentives in order to keep a career in politics. And so it seems that her risk aversion has led her to crumble under scrutiny. And so if she doesn't seem to have been entrapped in an interview like this, she's just being interviewed by a hostile outlet. But if you are going to allow yourself to be interviewed by a hostile outlet, you have to be able to stick by your convictions. She has allowed herself to crumble under the slightest bit of pressure, and so that means that she, unfortunately, isn't ready for the political arena. And what she said is completely acceptable, and it's even acceptable by Reform's risk-averse media strategy, because they don't distinguish between British citizens based on background, religion, ethnicity, sexuality, etc. They're still very liberal about this. And yes, British citizens should be put first. I think Indigenous Brits should be put first and foremost because they are the people who have inherited the land, they are the custodians of the culture, they are the standard bearers of our civilization. She didn't even go that far. She just said born and bred, which means that you are born physically in the place and brought up here. And she has committed the unforgivable sin of noticing a difference between cultures, groups, inheritances, etc. And so she is worried about being absolutely pilloried by the other side, and she's potentially afraid of being pilloried by her own party because there was a point in time where Reform UK were allowing Hope Not Hate to vet their candidates. I think that time has fortunately passed, but her making this blunder live on air has unfortunately shown that she's not fit for the fight, and we really need courageous people to man the ramparts right now, because we can't afford to be worried about being called racist by our enemies who will always call us racist, because behind the accusation of racism lies the implication that anything except the opening of our borders, the abandoning of our culture, and the destruction of our country is unacceptable to our enemies. And so we should be pinning our colours to the mast and doing exactly what is unacceptable to people who have such goals in mind.
Connor, I'm interested in your view on what was the biggest story of the week before the terror attack on the synagogue, which was this claim from Reform UK leadership that actually the violent language being used by the Labour Party was part of an attempt to almost encourage violence against Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage. This is what Richard Tice said during a combative interview on Sly News.
And as far as we're concerned, the Prime Minister crossed the line. That's a matter of judgment. That's our judgment. And let me tell you and your viewers, if anything happens physically to any of our reform activists or elected councillors, frankly, I will hold the Prime Minister personally responsible.
Yeah, but people in the past talk about fighting racism. They don't literally mean it, Richard. You know this. I mean, by the way, they've been 20th century language used. So, Richard, but by the way, so Nigel Farage once said any normal and fair-minded person would have a right to be concerned if a group of Romanian people suddenly moved in next door. Why? I mean, that in many ways.
That's not it. That's not saying taking farms. I'm sorry.
But Richard, you honestly literally think the Prime Minister
literally suggested he gave licence to Antifa yesterday to take up arms. He incited violence. He is responsible personally for anything physically.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think the Prime Minister intended that way, or any right-minded person would think that they literally meant taking up arms.
Connor, where do you stand on this argument?
Wow, I'm impressed. Richard had his Weetabix this morning. I mean, he and Zia Yusuf, again, they've been targets of my criticism in the past for being disparaging to that lot and the like. But they have both been completely correct on this, because when the left invents the term stochastic terrorism, which basically means creating a permission structure, a rhetorical environment in which violence is encouraged, and they project it onto the right, what they're doing is they're describing the tactic that they themselves want to use. And we've seen in the immediate aftermath of the murder of Charlie Kirk, where the alleged assassin wrote "Hey Fascist" catch on the bullet cartridges, in the aftermath of the shooting at the Texas ICE facility, where some deranged leftist accidentally killed 2 detainees, none of the ICE agents, and then shot himself to death, where he put anti-ICE on his bullet casings. And, of course, the attempted murder of President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then on the Florida golf course, where both attempted assassins had imbibed the rhetoric about Trump being a fascist, the second coming of Adolf Hitler, and about to instantiate a dictatorship in America, which would be impossible to remove him from power by democratic means. We can see that if you encourage the most febrile, demented, violent members of the leftist base with completely off-piste rhetoric, then you encourage violence and you incite assassination, either attempted or successful, against political candidates. And what they're doing by saying this, what David Lammy is doing by saying Farage somehow is 100 years older than we all know and is a member of the Hitler Youth, or Shabana Mahmood saying that he is worse than being racist, or Keir Starmer saying you are the enemy and this is a battle for the soul of the nation, basically copying, note for note, rhetoric that Joe Biden used, and Joe Biden was too cognitively impaired to even know he used it back in 2022. What they're doing is saying, you are at the lowest possible point of the post-war moral order. You're a fascist, you're a Nazi, you're a racist. And that puts a target on your back, because fascist, Nazi, and racist, as Oren McIntyre tweeted recently, just means person I am allowed to kill and will be celebrated if I do that. And so, Tice is right, Yusuf is right, they're encouraging violence against Farage and all of the reform supporters, and so if something happens, Keir Starmer and his cabinet are responsible.
How long have we known that the representation of black people specifically in UK advertising, since this woke wave that took over after the Black Lives Matter idiocy of 2020, is not just way out of proportion, but drastically not representative of our country? And if you said that, which don't get me wrong, I would, very quickly you'd get false smears of racism and bigotry. But a new study, ironically conducted by the very, very woke Channel 4 has shown that even though there's just 4% black people in England and Wales, they feature now in over 50% of TV advertising. And as this report on the matter explained, TV adverts not only overrepresent black people, but they just pretend that the over 70s don't exist. Now, this was according to Channel 4's Mirror on the Industry study, and it discovered that despite diversity in adverts improving, some minorities are rarely featured. I guess they're not the right minorities. The analysis was carried out by the agency Tapestry, which audited the top 500 adverts shown across all stations over 2 4-week periods. It found that more than half of the commercials featured black people, even though according to the 2021 census, 4% of the population of England and Wales is black. However, the representation of disabled, elderly, and pregnant people was lagging behind that for people of colour. Disabled people were included in just 4% of the TV adverts studied, despite them making up almost 18% of the population. Moreover, pensioners, aged 70 and above, featured in only 2% of the top 500 commercials. Pregnant women were in just 0.1%, and people categorised as LGBTQA+ appeared in just 2% of adverts, below the 3% of the population they account for. People from a South Asian background make up 8% of the population, but featured in 17% of adverts. East Asians account for 1% of the population and featured in 11% of adverts. So we know what's been going on here, and we can see it, right, with our own eyes every time we turn on the mainstream media. Watch.
Sainsbury's. Are we made of money?
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
In store, Bridget, who is deaf, is being recommended a laptop.
And this Surface Copilot Plus PC live captions calls.
Perfect for work.
How do I look?
Slaying.
Maya. Fabulous. Really? She'll love that.
Robin.
Oh, that's very them.
And finally, these actual statistics mean that people are prepared to start speaking up. Colin Brazier posted today, we learned half of all adverts feature black people, although they represent only 4% of the population. Yesterday, I sat in a medical facility where not a single poster of many depicted a white man. Social engineering, pure and simple. And former BBC presenter Liz Kershaw wrote, "We knew it." She added, "It's not just the ads." In 2020, BBC senior management issued a diktat that 20% of people on air, presenters, guests, etc., should be non-white. Production staff who did not hit this target would not get their annual bonus. Now, Connor Tomlinson, for a long time, I believe that the whole idea of diversity has been completely warped because of a hard left Marxist agenda. Because my understanding of diversity was that it was just meant to represent the population, right? Which means that if there's 4% of black people in England and Wales, they should be seen about 4% of the time on ads. But we know it's not just advertising that's doing this. I mean, look at Woke ITV. We are every single day on the lunchtime panel show, Loose Women. There's usually 2 black people, meaning that they're acting as if 50% of the population is indeed black.
Yeah, diversity just means non-white, Dan. That's all it's ever used to mean. Non-white, non-Christian, non-English, not straight, etc. You know, the majority of the population. And so representation has a meaning. Hannah Pitkin defined this in her book on representation. And she used the term to mean something absent being made present. And the reason that's pertinent is because these people believe that, much like speech is violence, that if you say something, it becomes true. So, for example, they believe that literally everyone is a blank slate. They believe that everyone is equal. They believe that the only divisions that exist between us, between groups, between cultures, between people, are entirely arbitrary. And so, you noticing a difference is causing the division. And so, all they have to do is socially engineer society until everyone is represented literally everywhere and everyone is indistinguishable, until we rewrite our history by pretending that Anne Boleyn is black, that period dramas like Bridgerton actually always had black and Asian aristocracy, that the Anglo-Saxons fighting the Norman invasions are sub-Saharan Africans. They just have to do all of that to convince you that literally everyone is different. And they do that by using racial discrimination in the present to achieve some hypothetical egalitarian utopia eventually. But when you say it's Marxist, in the same way as Marx promised a dictatorship of the proletariat, the collectivization of all property, and the killing of the bourgeoisie, to then somehow get to a stateless, classless utopia where everyone sings Kumbaya and is fat and happy. The details on how we get to that post-racial, post-bigoted, egalitarian utopia is very vague. But what they want to do in the present, by giving themselves and their friends and their co-ethnics more money, usually from the state, more job opportunities and more power, that's all very detailed, that's all very insistent. And so one must think that actually representation, the project of diversity and the like, is just a project of racial resentment and seething insecurity about your sexual proclivities that gives you more wealth, more power, more status to punish your enemies and ameliorate your insecurities. And actually just the talk of equality and utopia is all just window dressing for anti-white racism.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the anti-white racism that now spews forth from not just the mainstream media, but the entertainment industry and the advertising industry is out of control. I mean, it is the only form of racism which is, of course, now completely accepted. And on that, I totally agree with you, Connor. I guess what surprises me so much, though, is that advertising is all about making corporations money. And you would think that money was their overriding priority. But surely making advertising, which is aimed at a predominantly white audience that doesn't feature white people, is actually costing these companies money. Yet they put their desire to socially engineer ahead of profits. That's surprising, isn't it?
No, unfortunately not, Dan. So there are three reasons why this happens. First of all, because the projections of Gen Z being the most diverse generation ever means that they're constantly told that because we are ethnically heterogeneous, they have to market to non-white people in order to get their foot in the door. Number two, of course, there are various advertising risk management bodies and NGOs like the Human Rights Campaign in America. There's also like a global advertising regulator body called GARM that tells the advertisers and these companies that you have to hit these certain diversity quotas, else you are discriminatory. And the implication there is a kind of mafia intimidation tactic saying, nice business you got. Would be a shame if we were to call you racist and something would happen to it, wouldn't it? So corporations all comply out of risk aversion, and that's why adverts all seem uniform with, you know, a black woman and a white man in a relationship, or the other way around constantly. There are an overrepresentation of gay and trans people, for example, and it just becomes a kind of absurd identity circus. The third reason is because under ESG, and this has been withdrawn somewhat in America, but it's still with rocket fuel in the EU and UK, there are hedge funds propping these companies up by hitting certain diversity tick boxes. So there are entire subsidy funds set up by BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the like, all World Economic Forum affiliated, of course, that say, if you hit your corporate social responsibility score for this year, you can unlock extra funding and investment from these hedge funds who set the criteria in the first place. And lots of this criteria, especially after the 2020 George Floyd riots, revolve around race, sexuality, and especially climate responsibility. So if you're seen to be a sustainable business, if you're seen to fund things like flights out of state for your employees to access abortions or transgender surgery for your employees, and if you put black people in positions of power or in your advertisements, you get subsidies from these hedge funds that are trying to socially engineer all of our countries to be one great big Tower of Babel. And so they are happy to take the loss so long as they get direct investment from these corporations that want to build a John Lennon's Imagine utopia and instead are just going to build Rwanda or Lebanon.
Connor Tomlinson, brilliant stuff. Connor is, of course, host of Tomlinson Talks, which is a brilliant show on YouTube, but always love having you as part of Outspoken, Connor, too. Thank you so much. And thank you for your company all week. We're about to reveal the worst Britain in the world this week. It is a clean slate of Labour nominees. A reminder, because, of course, this is taken from our Union Jackass winners from Monday to Thursday. On Monday, it was the country's corrupted Prime Minister, Slippery Starmer. On Tuesday, our corrupted Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. On Wednesday, our corrupted Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy. And on Thursday, our corrupted Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. I'm sure you're seeing a theme here. We've had nearly 70,000 votes and a huge amount of comments coming from you too. Alistair Mitchell, said, American here, I'd heard of your Mr. Lammy, but had not heard him speak until this week. I consider myself extremely lucky in that respect. He lives up to the word salads that issue from our Ms. Kamala Harris. I'm always amazed by people who can talk endlessly and say absolutely nothing for an extended period of time. Oh my goodness, you are so right. Lammy is absolutely our Kamala Harris, and hopefully he'll only ever reach as high as the Deputy Prime Minister position, a bit like she did. And of course, his word salad did nothing to stop the booing and the heckling at the vigil in Manchester earlier today. Buffalo Sports Club wrote, David Lammy went on Masterminding, got asked who came after Henry VIII. He proudly answered Henry VII. The audience went silent. Even the buzzer seemed confused. He's the deputy leader of the Labour Party, but apparently numbers aren't his strong suit. Maybe he thought history works like a countdown. JSBBC said, we must perform a citizen's arrest on Starmer and privately prosecute for his incitement speeches. I love that idea. Cheryl Alex 6540 said, I used to go out walking on my own everywhere. I used to sit in the park and chill, and now I just really don't feel safe. Starmer has endangered his own people in this country and getting away with it. And I can't believe no one can stop this. This is so worrying. It truly is. And the Baggy Babe said, Starmer doesn't even care what we think about him. He's still got another 4 years to bring us down completely. Then with his money, he will go and live away from the mess he will leave us in. Shame on him and the whole cabinet. Okay, so lots of feedback coming in. The results are in. In fourth position, with 2% of the vote, Rachel Reeves. In third position, with 7% of the vote, Shabana Mahmood. The runner-up, with 9% of the vote, David Lammy. But the worst Briton in the world this week, with an overwhelming 82% of your 70,000 votes, the Prime Minister, Slippery Starmer. Well, it wasn't even close, was it? It wasn't even close. It's been a difficult week, hasn't it? I hope that you have found a little bit of comfort here. At least we can speak honestly about what's going on. At least we can speak honestly about the huge corruption and complicity that we're seeing from our mainstream media over this story. But God, it's been tough. I've been angry, I've been sad, and I'm very much heartened to have you with me on this really, really difficult period for the country. It's just horrendous. We are going to move over to Substack now, though, for the Royal Uncancelled After Show. I'm teaming up with the Royal News Network today because Prince William has given arguably the most insightful interview of his entire life. It is absolutely fascinating. We will be decoding it. We will be analysing it. Lots of news to be made. You can join us for that discussion over on Substack, www.outspoken.live. But I hope you have a blessed weekend. I am going to try and recover from this little cold that I've picked up since coming back. And I will be back with you 5 p.m. UK time, Monday, live, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hit subscribe right now if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. Plus, we are now available as a podcast too, on Spotify, as a video, and on Apple Podcasts too. Please do subscribe and rate and review. That really does help Outspoken. Have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you.